Veronika Volkov. The name whispered in hushed tones in the fashion capitals of the world. Her image, plastered across magazines and billboards, defined an era of impossible beauty. A cascade of platinum blonde hair, piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you, and a lithe, almost ethereal grace on the runway. She was the undisputed queen, the muse of every major designer, the face that launched 1,000 trends. But the shimmering facade concealed a truth as sharp and dangerous as a shard of glass. Veronika Volkov was a ghost, a phantom born in the shadows of Cold War espionage, reborn as a supermodel to disappear in plain sight. Few knew of her past life as Agent Nightingale, a top-tier operative for a now-defunct intelligence agency. Her skills were legendary. A master of disguise, fluent in half a dozen languages, and lethal in hand-to-hand combat. She could extract information from the tightest lips and slip through the most secure defenses. But the past, like a relentless tide, always threatens to reclaim its own. The whispers started subtly at a fleeting recognition in the eyes of a stranger at a Paris fashion show. A coded message left on her answering machine, a relic from her former handler. Veronika had lived a double life for years, carefully compartmentalizing her past from her present. She'd convinced herself she was safe, that the ghosts of her former life were finally laid to rest. She had even begun to believe it herself. The memory of Bucharest still haunted her. A botched extraction, a double cross, the agonizing screams of her team as they were gunned down in the alleyway. Veronika had barely escaped with her life, the betrayal etched into her very soul. That mission had forced her into hiding, into the carefully constructed persona of Veronika Volkov. She thought she had erased herself, reinvented her existence. But some debts, it seemed, could never be truly paid now. Years later, the past had caught up. The agency she thought was dismantled had resurfaced, more powerful and more ruthless than ever before. They remembered Nightingale. They needed her skills, her knowledge, and they wouldn't hesitate to use any means necessary to get her back. A seemingly innocuous meeting with a supposed photographer turned into a nightmare. A drugged drink, a black bag over her head, the chilling realization that her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. Veronika Volkov, the runway icon, vanished without a trace. Only Agent Nightingale remained, bound and gagged, a prisoner of her past. The world would mourn the loss of a fashion icon, unaware of the desperate struggle for survival unfolding in the shadows. And somewhere, far away, a man named Shaw would receive a cryptic message, a single word that would shatter his carefully constructed solitude and set him on a collision course with a hidden evil. The message? Nightingale. The Gulag wasn't marked on any map. It existed in the blind spot of global surveillance, a digital black hole nestled deep within the Siberian wilderness. Officially, it was a defunct mining operation, a relic of the Soviet era left to rust and decay. In reality, it was a prison for ghosts, a repository for inconvenient truths, and a training ground for the next generation of black ops assassins. Veronika awoke to the cold, damp air of her cell. The only light filtered through a barred window, casting long, skeletal shadows across the concrete walls. Her head throbbed, a dull ache that echoed the deeper pain in her soul. She was stripped of her identity, her clothes replaced by a coarse, gray uniform that felt like a shroud. The Veronika Volkov the world knew was gone, reduced to a number in a forgotten prison. The men who had taken her were efficient, devoid of emotion. They spoke in clipped, professional tones, their faces masked with a chilling indifference. They were not interested in her fame, her wealth, or her influence. They wanted Agent Nightingale, the woman buried beneath layers of designer clothes and carefully crafted smiles. Her interrogation began swiftly probing questions about her past missions, her contacts, her loyalties. They were searching for something specific, a piece of information she had guarded for years, a secret that could unravel their entire operation. Veronika resisted, her mind a fortress against their relentless assault. She knew that giving them what they wanted would be a death sentence, not just for her, but for countless others. Between interrogations, she was subjected to brutal training exercises, designed to break her spirit and remind her of her former life. Hand-to-hand combat with hulking guards, forced marches through the freezing snow, and psychological manipulation that chipped away at her resolve. They wanted to strip away the veneer of the supermodel, to expose the hardened operative beneath. The Gulag was a microcosm of the world she had tried to escape, a place where loyalty was a commodity, where betrayal was a weapon, and where survival depended on your ability to adapt. She saw other prisoners, former agents like herself, broken and defeated, their eyes hollow with despair. She refused to become one of them. The organization that held her captive was known only as the Directorate. They were a shadowy cabal of former intelligence officers, disillusioned politicians, and corporate mercenaries, united by a shared vision of global dominance. They operated outside the boundaries of international law, manipulating governments, funding insurgencies, and eliminating anyone who stood in their way. Veronica knew that escaping their clutches would be a near impossible feat, but she refused to surrender. She had survived worse. She had to. Because somewhere out there, Shaw was coming, and she needed to be ready when he arrived. Her past, her skills, everything she had tried to bury, would become her weapons once more. Shaw lived a life of quiet desperation. He wasn't Jason Statham's usual action hero persona, a whirlwind of perfectly timed punches and witty one-liners. Years had weathered him, etched lines of regret around his eyes and dulled the once sharp edges of his movements. He existed in the gray areas, a ghost in the machine, a man trying to outrun the demons of his past. He ran a small, struggling fishing charter business off the coast of the Florida Keys, the endless expanse of the ocean a constant reminder of the vastness of his loneliness. He hadn't seen Veronica in almost a decade. They had been partners, lovers, comrades in arms, bound together by the shared adrenaline of dangerous missions and the fragile hope of a future that never materialized. Bucharest had shattered that hope, leaving him with a gnawing guilt that he couldn't shake. That he blamed himself for not being able to save her team, for not being able to save her. He'd convinced himself she was dead, a necessary lie to protect his sanity. The message arrived in a waterproof container, attached to a buoy he hauled in one morning. It was a dead drop, a relic from a bygone era, a single encrypted file on a thumb drive. That he recognized the encryption algorithm instantly, a proprietary code they had developed together, a secret language only they understood. It was a message from the past, a desperate plea for help. The file contained a single word: Nightingale. Shaw's blood ran cold. The years of self-imposed exile melted away, replaced by the familiar surge of adrenaline, the cold, calculating focus of a man with a mission. Veronica was alive, and she was in trouble. Deep trouble. He knew what Nightingale meant. It was their emergency code, reserved for situations where all other communication channels were compromised. It meant she was captured, her identity exposed, her life hanging by a thread. It meant the Directorate had resurfaced. He spent the next 48 hours dismantling his life. He sold the charter boat, liquidated his assets, and packed a bag with the bare essentials: a Glock 19, a satellite phone, a collection of passports, and a worn photograph of Veronica, taken during their time in Prague. He contacted a few old associates, shadowy figures who owed him favors, men and women who still operated in the margins of the intelligence world. He needed information, resources, and a way to disappear completely. He knew he was walking into a hornet's nest, that the Directorate would be expecting him. They would have eyes everywhere, waiting for him to make a mistake. But he didn't care. Veronica was more than just a partner, more than just a lover. She was the only person who had ever truly understood him, the only light in his dark and twisted world. He would move heaven and earth to get her back. He was no longer the broken man fishing for a living. He was Shaw, and he was coming for Nightingale. Shaw's investigation began in the underbelly of Prague, a city steeped in history and secrets. He knew the city like the back of his hand, every hidden alleyway, every clandestine meeting point, every whisper of information that circulated through the city's criminal network. It was a dangerous game he was playing, a high-stakes dance with shadows and ghosts. His first contact was the Professor, an elderly hacker who lived in a dilapidated apartment filled with obsolete technology. The Professor had a knack for accessing information that was supposedly unhackable, a skill that made him both valuable and vulnerable. He owed Shaw a debt, a life debt incurred during a botched operation in East Berlin years ago. The Professor confirmed Shaw's worst fears. Veronica had been captured by the Directorate, her file scrubbed from every official database. It was as if she had never existed. The directorate had perfected the art of erasure, making people disappear without a trace. The professor managed to recover a fragmented satellite image, pinpointing a remote location in Siberia, a region known for its harsh climate and impenetrable terrain. The Gulag? The professor whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of his ancient computers. They call it the Gulag, a place where memories go to die. Shaw's next stop was a former arms dealer named Dmitri, a burly Russian with a penchant for expensive vodka and even more expensive weaponry. Dmitri was hesitant to help. The directorate's reach extended far and wide, and crossing them was a death sentence. Shaw reminded him of the favors he had done in the past, the times he had saved Dmitri from certain death. Dmitri, grudgingly, agreed to provide him with the necessary equipment. A silenced sniper rifle, a set of thermal goggles, and a heavily armored SUV. But the most crucial piece of information Dmitri provided was the name of a mole within the directorate, a disgruntled former agent named Anya who was willing to betray her superiors. Anya was Shaw's only hope of getting inside the Gulag, of navigating its defenses and finding Veronica before it was too late. Contacting Anya was a risky proposition. She was a ghost, living under deep cover, constantly monitored by the directorate's surveillance network. Shaw used a series of coded messages, relayed through a network of burner phones, to establish contact. Anya was skeptical at first, unsure if she could trust him. But Shaw spoke her language, the language of betrayal, the language of redemption. Anya revealed the layout of the Gulag, its security protocols, and the location of Veronica's cell. She also warned him about the warden, a ruthless sadist named Volkov, no relation, who enjoyed torturing his prisoners. Volkov was a formidable opponent, a master of hand-to-hand combat and a skilled interrogator. Shaw knew that he was walking into a trap. The directorate would be expecting him. They would be waiting for him to make a mistake. But he had no choice. Veronica's life depended on him. He was running out of time. The pieces were in place. The plan was set. It was time to unleash hell. The Siberian landscape was a brutal canvas of snow and ice, a desolate expanse that stretched to the horizon. Shaw drove the armored SUV relentlessly, the vehicles reinforced, suspension groaning under the strain of the frozen terrain. He followed a series of GPS coordinates provided by Anya, each one leading him deeper into the heart of the wilderness. The directorate had a significant presence in the region, a network of informants and security checkpoints that guarded the approaches to the Gulag. Shaw bypassed them with a combination of stealth, deception, and ruthless efficiency. He disabled surveillance cameras, evaded patrols, and eliminated anyone who posed a threat, leaving a trail of silenced bodies in his wake. He reached a remote outpost, a dilapidated shack that served as a forward observation post for the directorate. Inside, 2 guards were huddled around a crackling radio, their faces illuminated by the flickering light. Shaw moved silently, like a ghost in the snow, disabling them before they could raise the alarm. He examined their equipment, a collection of outdated radios and surveillance gear. He found a map of the surrounding area, marking the location of the Gulag and the surrounding security perimeter. The Gulag was located in a deep ravine, surrounded by high walls and electrified fences. It was a fortress, designed to withstand any attack. Shaw knew that a frontal assault would be suicide. He needed a plan, a way to infiltrate the Gulag without alerting the guards. He studied the map carefully, searching for a weakness, a vulnerability in the Gulag's defenses. He noticed a series of underground tunnels, remnants of the old mining operation. The tunnels were unstable and dangerous, but they offered a potential route into the Gulag. He contacted Anya, relaying his findings. Anya confirmed the existence of the tunnels, but warned him about their instability. They were riddled with traps and collapses, and there was a high risk of getting buried alive. But it was the only option they had. Anya provided him with a schematic of the tunnel system, marking the location of known traps and collapses. She also gave him a code that would disable the electrified fences surrounding the Gulag. It was a long shot, but it was their best chance. Shaw spent the next several hours preparing for his infiltration. He donned a thermal suit, packed his backpack with explosives and climbing gear, and checked his weapons one last time. He knew that the odds were stacked against him, that he was walking into a death trap. But he was driven by a single purpose, a burning desire to save Veronica. He approached the entrance to the tunnels, a dark and forbidding hole in the side of the ravine. He took a deep breath. Steeling his nerves, it was time to descend into the darkness, to confront the demons of his past and fight for the future he had almost lost. He activated the code Anya had provided, disabling the electrified fences. The gulag was no longer impenetrable. He was coming inside. The air in the tunnels was thick with the stench of decay and damp earth. Water dripped constantly from the ceiling, forming puddles on the uneven floor. Shaw moved slowly, his thermal goggles cutting through the darkness, revealing the hidden dangers that lay ahead. The schematic Anya provided was his lifeline, guiding him through the labyrinthine network of tunnels. The first obstacle was a series of tripwires, connected to pressure-sensitive explosives. Shaw disarmed them with practiced ease, his movements precise and deliberate. He had defused hundreds of bombs in his career, each one a delicate dance with death. These were amateurish by comparison, but he couldn't afford to be complacent. He encountered several collapses, sections of the tunnel that had caved in, blocking his path. That he used explosives to clear the debris, carefully controlling the blasts to avoid triggering further collapses. The sound of the explosions echoed through the tunnels, a deafening roar that could alert the guards above. He had to move quickly as he came across a group of rats, their eyes glowing red in the darkness. They scattered as he approached, their scurrying feet echoing through the tunnels. He knew that rats were often an indication of larger problems, structural instability, or the presence of other creatures. He pressed on, his senses on high alert. He reached a flooded section of the tunnel, the water icy cold and waist-deep. He waded through the water, his teeth chattering from the cold. He knew that hypothermia was a real threat, especially in these conditions. He had to reach Veronica soon. He noticed a series of markings on the walls, symbols that he recognized from his time with the agency. They were warning signs, indicating the presence of booby traps. He followed the markings carefully, avoiding the traps that lay in wait. He encountered a group of directorate guards patrolling the tunnels, their faces grim and determined. They were searching for him, tracking his progress through the tunnels. Shaw engaged them in a close-quarters firefight, his silenced pistol spitting death. He moved quickly and efficiently, eliminating the guards without making a sound. He reached a ventilation shaft, a narrow opening that led to the interior of the gulag. It was his final obstacle, the last barrier between him and Veronica. He climbed up the shaft, his muscles burning with exertion. He reached the top, peering into the gulag. He saw Veronica, huddled in a cell, her face pale and drawn. She looked weak, but her eyes were still defiant. He knew that she was still fighting, that she hadn't given up hope. He was almost there. He attached a silencer to his sniper rifle, taking aim at the guard tower. One shot, one kill. He disabled the security cameras, plunging the gulag into darkness. It was time to unleash hell. He jumped down from the ventilation shaft, landing silently on the ground. The assault had begun. Darkness descended upon the gulag, a cloak of shadows that concealed Shaw's movements. The silence was broken only by the crunch of his boots on the snow-covered ground and the distant howls of wolves. He moved with a purpose, a predator stalking its prey. The first wave of guards was patrolling the perimeter, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Shaw used the shadows to his advantage, moving silently and swiftly. He employed a combination of stealth takedowns and brutal close-quarters combat, disabling the guards before they could raise the alarm. A garrote wire, a well-placed knife thrust, a swift break to the neck. Each takedown was executed with ruthless precision. He reached the main gate, a heavy steel barrier that was guarded by two heavily armed soldiers. He couldn't risk a direct assault. He used a smoke grenade to create a diversion, blinding the guards and allowing him to slip past unnoticed. He planted explosives on the gate's hinges, setting a timer for 5 minutes. He infiltrated the main compound, a maze of barracks, guard towers, and administrative buildings. The alarm hadn't been raised yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time. He needed to reach Veronica's cell as quickly as possible. He encountered resistance at every turn. Directorate guards patrolled the corridors, their weapons drawn and ready. Shaw engaged them in a series of intense firefights, using his superior training and tactical skills to gain the upper hand. But they wouldn't break. They couldn't break. Veronica's freedom and their survival depended on it. Staggering from the armory wreckage, the adrenaline barely masking the pain, Shaw and Veronica pressed onward. They needed to find a way out, but something felt wrong. The Directorate's forces, while relentless, seemed almost contained. They weren't throwing everything they had at them, but it was as if they were being herded. Following a hunch, Shaw deviated from their planned escape route, heading towards the administrative section of the Gulag. Veronica, despite her pain, didn't question him. She trusted his instincts. They moved through the darkened corridors, their senses on high alert, until they reached a hidden door, concealed behind a bookcase in the warden's office. Shaw forced the door open, revealing a hidden laboratory, a sterile and unsettling space filled with advanced technology. Scientists in white coats bustled about, their faces illuminated by the glow of computer screens. In the center of the lab, a lone figure was strapped to a chair, her eyes vacant and unseeing. It was another former agent, a woman Shaw recognized from his past. "What is this place?" Veronica whispered, her voice filled with dread. Shaw approached one of the scientists, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against a wall. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. The scientist, his eyes wide with fear, stammered, We are reprogramming them, erasing their memories, rewriting their personalities, turning them into loyal servants of the Directorate." Shaw's blood ran cold. The Gulag wasn't just a prison, it was a black site, a place where they broke people, erased their identities, and turned them into weapons. He looked at the woman strapped to the chair, her mind a blank slate, her spirit crushed. He understood now. The Directorate didn't just want to eliminate Veronica. They wanted to control her, to use her skills and knowledge for their own nefarious purposes. He turned to Veronica, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and determination. "They were going to brainwash you," he said. "Erase your memories, turn you into one of them." Veronica's face paled. She understood the implications. Her skills, her knowledge, her very identity, weaponized against the world at IT, was a fate worse than death. Shaw looked around the lab, his mind racing. He couldn't let this continue. He had to shut this place down. He grabbed a canister of highly volatile chemicals, placing it in the center of the lab. "This ends here," he said. He set a timer on the canister, giving them 5 minutes to escape. The scientists scrambled to evacuate the lab, their faces filled with panic. Shaw and Veronica made their way back to the corridor, their mission now clear. They weren't just escaping the Gulag. They were destroying it. They knew that the revelation of the Gulag's true purpose had changed everything. The Directorate wouldn't just let them walk away. They would hunt them down, relentlessly, until they were both dead, but they were ready. They had a purpose now, a reason to fight. They were no longer just trying to survive. They were trying to save the world. The alarms blared throughout the Gulag, a cacophony of noise that signaled their imminent destruction. Shaw and Veronica fought their way back towards the main courtyard, the explosions from the hidden laboratory shaking the ground beneath their feet. Directorate soldiers swarmed towards them, their faces contorted with rage. As they reached the courtyard, they were confronted by a lone figure. Standing in their path it was Volkov, the warden of the Gulag, a hulking man with a scarred face and eyes that burned with cold fury. He was a formidable opponent, a master of hand-to-hand combat and a ruthless killer. "Nightingale," Volkov said, his voice a low growl. "I've been expecting you." He ignored Shaw completely, his focus solely on Veronica. "Volkov," Veronica replied, her voice filled with a mixture of hatred and fear. "I should have killed you in Bucharest." Shaw tensed, sensing the history between them. Anya had mentioned a personal connection, but he hadn't realized the depth of Bucharest. It all clicked into place. Volkov was the one who had betrayed her team, the one who had orchestrated the ambush that had forced her into hiding. "You failed," Volkov sneered. "You left me for dead. But I survived. And now, I will have my revenge." He lunged at Veronica, his movements surprisingly fast for a man of his size. Shaw stepped in front of her, intercepting Volkov's attack. The two men clashed, their bodies colliding with brutal force. The fight was intense, a brutal display of strength and skill. Volkov was a master of Russian Sambo, a devastating martial art that combined wrestling, judo, and striking techniques. Shaw relied on his years of experience in covert operations, using his agility and tactical skills to gain the upper hand. They traded blows, each strike landing with bone-jarring force. Shaw managed to land a few punches, but Volkov absorbed the blows with ease, his body seemingly impervious to pain. Volkov countered with a series of powerful kicks and throws, sending Shaw sprawling to the ground. Veronica, despite her injuries, joined the fight, attacking Volkov from behind. She used her agility and speed to evade his attacks, landing a few well-placed kicks and punches. But Volkov was too strong, too skilled that he grabbed Veronica, throwing her aside like a rag doll. Shaw rose to his feet, his body aching, his lungs burning. That he knew that he couldn't defeat Volkov in a straight fight. He needed to use his wits. To find a weakness, he noticed a small knife strapped to Volkov's LG. It was a traditional Russian fighting knife, a deadly weapon designed for close-quarters combat. Shaw feigned an attack, drawing Volkov's attention. As Volkov lunged forward, Shaw sidestepped, grabbing the knife from Volkov's leg. That he turned, plunging the knife into Volkov's chest. Volkov staggered backward, his eyes wide with shock. That he looked down at the knife protruding from his chest, his face contorted with pain. You can't win," he gasped. "The Directorate will never stop." "Then we'll stop them," Shaw replied, his voice filled with determination. He pulled the knife from Volkov's chest, letting the warden fall to the ground. The fight was over. The gulag was about to explode. It was time to leave. With Volkov dead, the gulag was spiraling into complete chaos. Explosions rocked the facility, Directorate soldiers scrambled in confusion, and the freed prisoners rampaged through the corridors. Shaw knew they had to get out, and fast. He helped Veronica to her feet, supporting her weight as they made their way towards the outer perimeter. She was weak and injured, but her spirit was unbroken. The years of training, the countless missions, had forged her into a survivor. They moved through the chaos, their combined skills and experience keeping them alive. Shaw took the lead, clearing a path through the enemy forces, while Veronica provided cover fire, her aim still deadly accurate. They worked together seamlessly, a well-oiled machine that had been dormant for too long. They encountered pockets of resistance, groups of Directorate soldiers who were determined to stop them. Shaw and Veronica fought back to back, their weapons blazing. They used their environment to their advantage, taking cover behind overturned vehicles and concrete barriers. They reached the main gate, the explosives they had planted earlier having detonated, creating a gaping hole in the steel barrier. But the gate was heavily guarded, a line of Directorate soldiers standing between them and freedom. Shaw devised a plan. He would create a diversion, drawing the soldiers' attention, while Veronica slipped through the hole in the gate. It was a risky plan, but it was their only chance. He grabbed a grenade, pulling the pin and throwing it towards the soldiers. The grenade exploded, sending shrapnel flying in all directions. The soldiers scattered, their attention focused on the explosion. Veronica seized the opportunity, sprinting towards the hole in the gate. She made it through, but not unscathed. A Directorate soldier fired at her, the bullet grazing her arm. Shaw followed close behind, engaging the soldiers in a close-quarters firefight. He eliminated the remaining guards, clearing a path for their escape. He grabbed Veronica's hand, pulling her towards the armored SUV they had left parked outside the perimeter. They reached the vehicle, climbing inside and slamming the doors shut. Shaw started the engine, spinning the wheels and speeding away from the gulag as they drove. Away, they looked back, watching as the facility erupted in a series of massive explosions. The gulag was gone. Reduced to rubble and ashes, they drove for hours, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the gulag. They knew that the Directorate would be hunting them, that they would never be safe, but they were free. They had survived, and they had each other. Shaw glanced at Veronica, her face pale and drawn. She was leaning back in her seat, her eyes closed. He knew that she was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. But he also knew that she was strong, that she would recover. They had a long road ahead of them, a dangerous journey that would take them across the globe, but they would face it together, side by side, just like they always had. They were Nightingale and Shaw, and they were ready to fight. The armored SUV tore across the Siberian landscape, its powerful engine roaring as Shaw pushed it to its limits. Veronica, despite her injuries, monitored their pursuers, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror. The Directorate wasn't going to let them escape so easily. A fleet of black SUVs appeared on the horizon, rapidly closing the distance. These weren't the same Directorate soldiers they had faced at the Gulag. These were highly trained operatives, driving modified vehicles equipped with advanced weaponry. The chase was on. Shaw expertly navigated the treacherous terrain, dodging snowdrifts and icy patches. The Directorate vehicles opened fire, their bullets impacting the armored SUV, sending sparks flying. Shaw returned fire, using his sniper rifle to disable one of the pursuing vehicles. The chase intensified, the vehicles hurtling across the frozen landscape at breakneck speed. The Directorate vehicles closed in, attempting to box them in. Shaw swerved violently, narrowly avoiding a collision. He spotted a frozen lake ahead, a vast expanse of ice that stretched to the horizon. It was a risky maneuver, but it was their only chance to escape. He steered the SUV onto the ice, its tires spinning as it struggled for traction. The Directorate vehicles followed, their drivers confident in their ability to overtake them. But the ice was treacherous, thin in places and prone to cracking. Shaw knew that one wrong move could send them plummeting into the icy depths below. He spotted a weak spot in the ice, a section that was visibly thinner and more unstable. He steered the SUV towards it, hoping to lure the Directorate vehicles into a trap. The lead Directorate vehicle followed, its driver unaware of the danger as it reached the weak spot. The ice cracked, and the vehicle plunged into the freezing water. The other Directorate vehicle swerved to avoid the hole, giving Shaw and Veronica a chance to escape. He accelerated, pushing the SUV to its maximum speed. They reached the other side of the lake, leaving the Directorate vehicles behind. But they knew that they wouldn't be safe for long. The Directorate had resources all over the world, and they would stop at nothing to recapture them. They reached a small town, a remote settlement on the edge of the Siberian wilderness. They needed to find a safe house, a place to lay low and plan their next move. They entered a dilapidated bar, seeking information and refuge. The bar was filled with rough-looking characters, men and women who had seen their fair share of trouble. Shaw approached the bartender, a grizzled old man with a knowing look in his eyes. He showed the bartender a wad of cash, asking for information about safe houses in the area. The bartender hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. He knew that helping them could put him in danger, but the cash was too tempting to resist. He scribbled down an address on a napkin, handing it to Shaw. "Be careful," he warned. "The Directorate has eyes everywhere." Shaw and Veronica thanked the bartender, leaving the bar and heading towards the safe house. They knew that they were walking into a trap, that the Directorate would be waiting for them, but they had no choice. They were running out of time, and they needed a place to regroup. The final confrontation was coming. The safe house was a dilapidated cabin on the outskirts of town, a far cry from the luxurious life Veronica once knew as expected. It was a trap. Directorate soldiers were waiting for them, hidden in the shadows, their weapons drawn. Shaw and Veronica were ready. They had anticipated the ambush, planning their counterattack in advance. They moved quickly and silently, taking down the soldiers one by one. A well-placed shot, a swift knife thrust, each takedown was executed with deadly precision. They secured the cabin, searching for clues about the mastermind behind Veronica's capture. They found a laptop containing encrypted files and communication logs. Shaw, with his technical skills, managed to crack the encryption, revealing a series of emails between the Directorate operatives and a high-ranking official within the Russian government. The official was a man named General Petrov, a powerful and influential figure with a long history of corruption and ties to organized crime. He was the one who had ordered Veronica's capture, the one who had orchestrated the entire operation. Shaw and Veronica knew that they had to confront Petrov, to expose his crimes and bring him to justice. They used their contacts within the intelligence community to track Petrov's movements, discovering that he was attending a high-profile summit in Moscow. They traveled to Moscow, infiltrating the summit disguised as members of the press. They moved through the crowds, their eyes scanning for Petrov. They found him in a private room, meeting with a group of other high-ranking officials. Shaw and Veronica burst into the room, their weapons drawn. The officials scrambled for cover, their faces filled with fear. Petrov remained calm, his eyes fixed on Veronica. "Nightingale," Petrov said, his voice cold and calculating. "I knew you would come." "This ends here, Petrov," Veronica replied, her voice filled with anger. "You will pay for what you've done." Petrov smiled, revealing a set of yellowed teeth. "You can't stop me," he said. "The directorate is too powerful. We control everything." "Not anymore," Shaw replied, stepping forward. "We're going to expose you, to show the world what you really are." Shaw pulled out the laptop, displaying the emails and communication logs that proved Petrov's involvement in Veronica's capture and the Gulag operation. The other officials in the room gasped, their faces filled with disbelief. Petrov's face turned red with rage. He lunged at Shaw, attempting to grab the laptop. Shaw sidestepped, avoiding Petrov's attack. Veronica stepped in front of Petrov, blocking his path. "It's over, Petrov," she said. "You're finished." Petrov pulled out a gun, aiming it at Veronica. Shaw reacted instantly, firing his weapon. The bullet struck Petrov in the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. The other officials in the room stared in shock, their faces